writers, you're listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life Podcast, where we highlight an episode from our backlist that will bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Tara Kremen, Director of Kobo Writing Life. April is National Poetry Month, so to honor this, I wanted to resurface this episode from 2020 with poet Jasmin Kaur. She talks to us about her journey as a writer and poet, what it's like for her to know her work has such a wide reach globally, and why she feels it's important for her to share and protect her authentic voice. I hope you enjoy.
In this episode, we talked to Jasmin Kaur.
And Jasmin Kaur is a writer, illustrator, and poet whose writing explores themes of feminism, womanhood, social justice, and love. She was one of the Tempest's 40 Women to Watch in 2019, and her debut poetry and prose collection, When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, came out in October last year.
So we were introduced to Jasmin through our former coworker, Taryn Deep, who thought Jasmin's story was a great fit for the podcast, and we agreed. We haven't featured many poets on the podcast before, and her debut poetry collection we thought would be a great story to talk about. And also, if you're a fan of poetry, make sure to check out her Instagram because she posts poems regularly. We hope you enjoy this episode. We hope you're keeping safe. But yeah, without further ado, here is the episode.
Hi, Jasmin. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation today.
Yes, we are too. Can you start by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and about your book?
Yeah, so my name is Jasmin Kaur. I am a spoken word artist, I'm an author, an illustrator. My debut collection of poetry, prose, and illustrations is out now. It's called When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, and it's available with Harper Teen across North America. This is a collection of poetry primarily and also short story and artwork that deals with what it is to be a South Asian woman, a woman of color, and, a woman navigating a world that is often inhospitable to, voices like mine, and a world that often doesn't want to listen to voices of women of color. So this book is really, an amalgamation of so many experiences that I've had and that I've witnessed in the world. And I think it reflects what it is to be a young Sikh woman in today's day and age, in North America especially.
Okay, thank you. Steph and I were just discussing, we've been reading it this week, and it's amazing. There's a lot of
I was going to say it made me mad, and I'm glad it did make me mad, because I'm like, oh my God, being a woman is hard.
There's a lot
of... I think that was something that I really reflected on, because there are pieces in this book that just take you on like an emotional journey. And I think that sometimes we just have to reckon with that stuff and reflect on it and not shy away from it just because it is painful. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
How did you decide? Did you start on Instagram? That's my first question, I think.
Yeah. So my journey as a poet began back when I was 19 years old. I'm 26 now. I kind of fell in love with spoken word poets that I found on YouTube, just kind of scrolling through different, YouTube accounts and things like that, like Latin poetry and Def Jam poetry. And I realized that I love this medium of expression. It took me on like a journey that had so much to do with the performance of storytelling alongside the aspect of traditional storytelling. And from there, I kind of developed a curiosity about whether or not I could engage in this craft as a performer as well as a listener. So in my undergrad, I studied creative writing along with English Lit, and I realized that I loved the creative writing aspect of my degree so much more than the Shakespeare and Milton and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't at the time really know where I would go with it. I thought that I would, finish my degree and go into teaching. That would be that. And I would just kind of enjoy poetry and performance for my own happiness and nothing else. But alongside that, I knew that I had a lot to say. I knew that I wanted to share my thoughts with the world. I didn't at the time think that, publishing a book was something that was going to be feasible or realistic for me, but I knew that there were other ways that I could get my voice out there. So I kind of got drawn to Instagram as my main medium for storytelling, just because I love the idea that I could go on there, I could, craft a piece and I could share it with my audience or, my community. And it wouldn't have to go through a process of censorship or a process of someone else deciding that work was valuable. I thought that, readers could make that decision for themselves. And I think that's a powerful thing to kind of put the ability to create back in the hands of creatives. And instead of having it always in the hands of someone else who will decide whether or not it is worth being read. So I stuck to Instagram for a long time. And I loved it for those reasons. But I also saw the value in, having a physical copy of my work, like, just something you can hold in your hands. I think that the written form in print is like an amazing, beautiful thing. And I think that Instagram, while it's a great place to start conversations, I think that, having my work physically bound into a book allows readers to immerse themselves more fully and with more focus into the work. So long story short, like I got my start on Instagram and I still use it, but I also love the fact that I can hold my book in my hands now.
Were you approached by a publisher, or was that something you sought out?
So I wasn't necessarily approached by a publisher, but I was approached by my literary agent who found me on Instagram, interestingly enough. So someone who my current agent followed at the time posted my work and she tagged me in it. So from there, my agent was able to find my Instagram account, and I was like, oh my God, like this is exciting. Like I wonder what she could possibly be doing, like following me of all people. And then we ended up talking a little while after that, and it turned out that she'd actually followed me because she was interested in representing me in my work. And I think that in that sense, like I got really, really lucky. Like, Catherine represents so many poets who I really admire and respect, and she was definitely the right person for, someone like me to bridge that gap between social media and like the publishing industry. So from there, my work got pitched to a bunch of different publishers, and I ended up at Harper Teen.
That's fantastic. At what point did you realize that your work was resonating with a wider audience? When were you using Instagram in the beginning? How long ago?
Yeah. So when I first started, like I kind of thought that my friends would follow me and the people who already were connecting with my work. I thought that I would end up with an audience that was primarily, Sikh women, Punjabi women from my local community. It was very interesting to me when, women of such diverse backgrounds started engaging with my work, because I didn't always envision it as like, work that was super universal. I thought that it was very specific to my experiences as a Sikh and Punjabi woman living in Canada. So when, for example, I have a poem titled Her Voice, it kind of went viral on the internet and it became used at, women's marches and, as like a poem that represents women's empowerment from, in relation to so many different issues. When that went viral, I was, very surprised and taken aback almost, because I thought it was so unique to my experience. But it turned out that, women were engaging with it for reasons that were way beyond, what I'd originally intended for the piece. So, my audience now is primarily women. And I have, women following me from around the world and who connect with my work in very unique ways. And I think that's really cool. I think that the internet, like as bad as it can be sometimes, it really can help us connect in a beautiful way as well. And I'm so grateful that I made that decision to create a public account, even though at the time, like I did not know who would, want to connect with the work.
Definitely. It's kind of scary having a public account, I feel like, as someone who doesn't really use social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I first got onto Instagram, I had a private account. And the reason was because, I was afraid of the internet, and I was afraid of like unsolicited critique and critique that is not constructive, that's just there to like kind of tear you down. So I kept my poems to myself and, my friends and family who followed me. But I also had this desire to kind of get my work out there and have it, heard by more folks. So it took me a while. Like I started on Instagram in 2012, I think, and it wasn't until 2016 that I kind of found the confidence to be able to create a public account. And, as much as people, on occasion can like, just send, really like hurtful messages or just terrible troll things. At the same time, I've connected with so many people who, engage with this work in such a heartfelt way. And they reach out to tell you that. And I think, those are the people who make the trolls worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How did it feel the first time that you saw that poem going viral, or people using it at marches, using it to almost empower themselves or create a message?
I was surprised, because like I said, this poem, when I originally wrote it, I was thinking about how Sikh women's voices specifically have been erased from the pages of history. And I was reflecting on how, my understanding of my own identity would be so different if I had more primary historical documents written by Sikh women of previous centuries. And I wrote it to kind of challenge that erasure of Sikh women from the pages of history. I was reflecting on how, in today's day and age, there are so many Sikh women who are documenting their lives, through poetry or books or film or photography or whatever it is, and how, amazing that is that we are kind of compiling history without realizing it, but, creating something for, girls and women 100 years from now to look back at and be like, hey, that's where my community was at. So when it went from this very specific, personal meaning to me to something that connected with folks of such, different backgrounds and people who are engaging with it in their own personal ways, like, it was exciting, but it was also a little bit scary because I didn't want, my own voice to be erased from the piece just because it connected with other people. So, like, there were times when the poem would be altered and edited. So, for example, like, just last year around this time, the poem went viral, but someone had crossed out the word scream out of the poem and written the word vote, kind of as if to say that, the poem gets its message across better if we're saying vote, because it's not enough to just like use your voice as a woman, you need to vote. And I get the impulse behind it, but I think that when that person edited the work, they weren't considering all of the diverse meanings that could exist within a metaphor. They were limiting it to one specific meaning that they had assigned to the piece. So I felt uncomfortable with that. I felt uncomfortable with somebody, taking my words and editing them just to suit their specific need at the time, rather than respecting the fact that it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I kind of grappled with whether or not I wanted to speak to that or whether I wanted to address that online. And I almost had to go through a process of reflecting on like how women are socialized very often to be as polite and palatable as possible. We're not socialized to speak up for ourselves very often. So I had to get over that barrier and recognize that it's okay for me to stand up for my work. It doesn't make me a mean person necessarily. Like, this is just me standing up for something that I wrote. So I ended up making the decision to write about why it is that it wasn't okay to edit my writing and to cross out my words without first seeking my permission. And I was like very happy that, like, for the most part, a lot of people understood that. They understood that as an artist, it's not okay to just like cut and paste and change things around and erase things just because, you have the feeling because it's on the internet. And by standing up for myself, more people actually were able to find my work, and more people found it on my terms and not just the way that someone else had decided my work would be written, which I think was like really cool. And it was the most like positive possible outcome from that kind of thing happening.
So it was worth taking the risk of standing up for yourself and your work then.
Yeah.
That's great.
So how did you find the publishing aspect? Because I feel like publishing a book is sometimes things are out of your control. And how did you navigate your first time publishing a book?
Yeah. So I think that I got super lucky in the sense that, my editor really sees the vision for my work, which I think is so important. And I think that, oftentimes writers and artists can get like super excited by the fact that somebody is giving them the time of day. And that leads to them like kind of making huge compromises in their work that doesn't reflect, what their work could be or what their original intentions are. I think that editing is so important. And I think that opening yourself to alternative possibilities for your work is so, so important. But I also think that staying true to the essence of what you're trying to do is valuable as well. I've always been one to say that we should amalgamate external critique that we receive with our original intentions for the work as well. Like, your voice does matter in that piece. So in that sense, I've been super lucky. I have an editor who really sees my intentions with the work and just helps me strengthen it to the best possible version that it could be. So it's definitely different stepping into that more critical space, but it wasn't a huge leap for me in the sense that, I'd done creative writing in my undergrad, and I really enjoyed that workshopping aspect to it. I really enjoyed having 20 eyes on my work and people kind of pulling it apart and analyzing where there is space for growth. So I'm always all for critique as long as you trust the person that's bringing the critique to the table. I think that's the most important thing.
In your book, you blend poetry with prose and also illustration. How did you come to that decision?
That has always been my style for as long as I've been, sharing my poetry online. I love mixed media, and I love the fact that stories can be told through so many different mediums, so many different layers. I'm definitely like a believer that there are all different forms of literacy, and visual and artistic literacy has always been something super important to me. I think that there are those pieces that I want to stand alone just as words, where I think that the words should only speak for themselves and they should be the only thing painting the picture. But I also think that there are pieces that deepen in meaning when you have illustrations accompanying them, or when the words are melded into the artwork. I think that beautiful things can happen in that sense. And as a teacher as well, I know the value of mixed media literacy. I think that the education world is moving more in this direction of honoring the fact that kids learn in so many different ways, and young readers engage in stories in so many different ways. For some people, graphic novels speak better to folks than, traditional illustration-less books. So I was also thinking about that. I was thinking about the fact that when young people are engaging with this work, they might be connecting with the words at times, but also they might be connecting with the illustrations. And I wanted to hold space for the value and all of that, all that ability to engage, and not just that singular traditional style of storytelling that we have been told in past generations is like the most valuable form of storytelling.
Yeah, I thought it was very effective in making it, I guess, more accessible. I would not normally pick up a book of poetry, but this was I really, really enjoyed this. And I think part of it was that you gave us different ways to read and interpret. I really liked that.
Absolutely.
And then you also narrated your own audiobook. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process, because I don't think you have narrated before. I could be wrong. I don't know.
I was super excited by the opportunity to be able to narrate the audiobook. We kind of toyed with having somebody else narrate it. And even as we were reflecting on that, I was thinking to myself, if we're going to have somebody else narrate it, I'll need to add notes here for them to pause and raise their voice and, emphasize certain words. Because, when I'm writing as a poet, I'm also writing as a spoken word artist. And I know as a spoken word artist that, your pauses and your inflections and, the rise and fall of your voice in a melodic way contributes to meaning, and it contributes to the theatrical aspect of the work. So I was thinking about all of that from a performer aspect. And I was thinking, this would be so much easier if I could do it myself.
Yeah.
So I pitched that idea to my editor, and she was on board as well. And it was my first time ever narrating an audiobook, and I was super nervous, but I was so happy to be able to do it, because I think that poetry is a performance to me as much as it is a reading experience. And I wanted to allow readers to have that that performance experience of the work if they're into, the audiobook side of things. So it was super exciting, also super nerve-wracking because I'd never done this before, but I'm also really very, very glad that I did. And I think that readers who have connected with the audiobook have felt that way as well, which is the most amazing thing to hear.
How long did it take to record?
So we originally planned for a day and a half, but it ended up getting done in a day, which was amazing.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to just the fact that a lot of these pieces are pieces that I had performed previously. So I'd had that bit of performance practice to how I wanted to emphasize certain pauses and tones. And I got to work with the Harper audio team, who did an amazing job of kind of giving me, advice as directors to tell me where to pause and, emphasize certain words in different ways that I hadn't considered before. So ultimately, we came out with a really cool, theatrical kind of performance of the book that I'm super proud to be able to share with readers.
Awesome.
Absolutely. I would love to hear a little bit more about what do you think it means for people to have access to stories that represent them? Particularly, you were saying you have quite a unique experience in Canada, but obviously there's other people like you, part of your community, that maybe don't always get their stories told.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Canada. I grew up in BC. I grew up as that kid who was constantly reading a book. I would, take a book with me to the grocery store and not look up and not look around at what my surroundings were. And I loved books, but I never actually saw myself in anything that I read. There was not a single time where I saw a sick girl represented in the books that I read. And as a kid, it didn't even faze me, I guess, because I didn't know that I could be in those books. But I can imagine how exciting it would have been for me if I did see myself in that way. So growing up, lacking that representation, realizing its importance, kind of made me decide that if I were to publish a book, it would reflect me. And I was super honored to be able to do that work through When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, especially. I think this is a book that really does not hold back, in the sense that, you see 6 illustrated and you see our stories told. And whether or not those stories are absolutely perfectly relatable to every single person that will pick up the story, there's always an opportunity to learn. And that, I think, is the most important thing. That someone who is picking up the book, who may not have been through the exact same things that I've been through as a sick girl and woman growing up in Canada, can read those stories and have an insight into what it's like to live in our bodies, or to live in our experiences. So that was really my motivation in incorporating my identity into this book. I understand that opportunities like this to be able to push open the doors of representation don't often come for Sikh women. And if I was going to have the opportunity, I wanted to go full force and be as candid and sincere as possible in pushing open that door for us. And it was so exciting for me to, literally draw myself into the book. Some of the illustrations are me, and include, people with turbans or, Sikh turbans, which are called the stada in the book. That was the most exciting thing, to be able to render ourselves visible in a world that doesn't always see us. Like I said before, I'm a teacher, and I taught at a elementary school in BC before jumping full force into writing. And I can speak to the fact that, when there is like a little Sikh girl or boy in the books, in the picture books that we would read in class, my students would get excited, because they don't often see that. And it's just like a little way of saying, hey, you matter as well. Like, you deserve to be here as well. Like, your stories are important. You are a part of our community. And I think that's what representation is. It's like reminding kids, reminding young people and readers in general that you are a part of this community that you love. And that's a beautiful thing to me.
Because it's so important to see your own people or your own story represented in some way, I think. For anyone listening is looking for those kind of books and maybe doesn't know where to find them, do you have any recommendations for us that we can share?
Yeah. So I think that it's super exciting to me that a lot of mainstream publishing houses are being more inclusive of marginalized voices. It was really exciting for me to hear that HarperCollins now has an Indigenous imprint dedicated to the stories of First Nations communities across North America. And that was just like a recent announcement that was made. And alongside that, specific to the experiences of Sikhs and South Asians, Saffron Press is a small indie press based in Ontario, and they are dedicated to crafting stories of Sikh children. They have some beautiful books that I think are great for classrooms that explain, aspects of Sikh identity, like head coverings and the Sikh turban, which I've actually used in my classroom to explain why some Sikh children choose to cover their heads with turbans. So they're some of my favorites.
That's a great recommendation. We'll share that.
I'm just curious a little bit about your writing process.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that? I don't know. Because if you're posting on Instagram, maybe it's different. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So my writing process isn't necessarily the same for all of my work. When it comes to Instagram, I tend to post some of my shorter pieces just because I feel that the internet doesn't always have the attention span for some of the longer work that I want to save for the book. But in general, when I'm writing a poem specifically, the work either comes from me sitting down at my desk for 5 hours straight and kind of reflecting on what it is that I want to say, or it comes all of a sudden to me, just kind of hits me in the stomach when I experience something or have like a reflection on something that I've witnessed in the world. So sometimes I will have the words kind of come to me almost whole and just needing a little bit of editing. And sometimes it'll be a lot harder. And I'll have to sit there and edit for hours straight. But I like to kind of do what I describe as a mind spill. Like, I will sit at my laptop or, with a blank piece of paper in front of me and just, write and let my mind wander where it wants to wander and not censor that or filter that I'm thinking about, the editing process or how an audience will feel about it. Because I feel like oftentimes I will stop myself from writing or feel a sense of writer's block because I'm just worried about how it will be interpreted by others. So in order to overcome that writer's block, I will just write without a filter, without a censor, without a single worry in my mind of anyone ever looking at the work. And then I'll kind of step back. And from that mind spill, which is very personal, which is meant for only me to read, I will pick out the gems and I will pick out, those lines or those ideas that I think can be crafted into a shareable piece. And from there, I'll start thinking about how to best communicate my message, how to edit the words, alter the placement on paper, revise the language to be, non-repetitive. Think about all those kind of logistical things that we have to think about when we're writing for an audience and not just writing for, ourselves in our journal. And after that process of self-editing and kind of revision, then I'll pass my work on to a close friend or someone who I trust for critique, and I'll get feedback from them. And then I will amalgamate the feedback I get with my own original intentions for the work and come up with a finalized piece that I feel is ready to be shared or ready to just be saved for, a book project or something like that. When it comes to writing prose, my process is a little bit different, just because of the nature of prose writing and fiction writing. I'll usually begin with an outline. I am an outliner. Like, I cannot write a single scene without knowing where it's going to go in general. Like, I need an A to B, but what happens in the middle along the way can change and move around, but I need to, in general, know what my intention is. I almost try to write like a thesis for the chapter that I'm writing, in the sense that there is a message that this chapter needs to convey that plays into the larger narrative of the book, and I need to make sure that I'm sticking to that point across the piece and not kind of getting lost along the way. So once I have like my outline in place, then I will just like kind of let the scene speak to me and let that kind of more loose creative process take place, where I go to those places that I didn't, outline necessarily perfectly prior to thinking about it. I kind of trust the characters to tell their story and figure out where feels the most authentic for their narrative to go or their dialogue to go and so on.
And how is it to get the kind of immediate feedback that you get on social media as compared to in a published book? And how much do you engage with the feedback that you get?
Yeah, so I think it's so interesting because I spent, many years writing pieces that would end up on the internet quite soon after that revision process was over, and you kind of feel out, whether or not your audience is connecting with certain poems versus others. You can tell how people feel about it based on, the comments that you get and the shares and all that kind of stuff. Writing a larger body of work, a larger book of fiction or, YA fiction or whatever it is, it can be a little scarier almost because you spend so much time in isolation working on the piece. You get to see it, your editor gets to see it, a couple of other people in the publishing house get to see it. But for the most part, like, it's just you guys reflecting on what you think the world is going to feel about it. So I think that still is something that I'm learning how to navigate, just having a project that is yours for so long and then kind of releasing it to the world and letting that process naturally take place without your desire to kind of like, shape the narrative around it. It can be challenging, but I think that it's necessary. And I don't have the answers yet because, like I said, this is still so new to me. My book being out there in the world for literally just over, a couple of months. I'm still figuring out every single day, and it's an exciting process. It's a scary process, but I think one that is necessary in order for this work to reach more people.
We were reading it on your website that your work had been celebrated. I'm literally going to read off your website by Jennifer Lopez at the American Music Awards, and then also activists like Reese Witherspoon, Cara Delevingne, Sophia Bush, Tessa Thompson. Like, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's really a testament to like the power of the internet. When I got onto Instagram, I did not think anyone except for my friends were going to really connect with this work, and to see how the internet kind of expands your audience and expands the horizons of what is possible, I think has been like amazing. And people who I'd never in my wildest dreams would have thought, connect with this work in such a meaningful way have, expressed like their love for like these poems. And it's like super exciting. And it's also just a reminder that on those days, when you feel like you don't really have a direction with your work, I can look back and reflect on the fact that not only is this work valuable to so many women who I never thought I could connect with before, it is valuable to the women who are closest to me as well. And I think that holding space for all of those moments of connection, I think are very important and very beautiful.
Definitely. In my mind, I'd be like, Reese Witherspoon has read something of mine. I'm like good for 3 months.
But it's amazing that something that you've written can be so far reaching and touch so many people's lives and affect them. It's very cool. What are you working on next? Have another book coming up?
Yeah, so right now I am at home and I am editing my next project, which is set to release currently around winter 2021. And in book one, where I begin a narrative in a short story format of a young Punjabi mom named Kiran and her daughter Sahara, I take their narrative all the way to the ending. So readers get to find out what happens. And they don't just get left on that, that cliffhanger, which I know is like super frustrating, but was also so necessary for folks to, be able to step into their story in a very visceral way. So right now I'm working on book two, and that is going to be more of a full-length novel told in prose primarily, but supported by poetry and artwork.
Okay.
Awesome.
we'll have to look out for that. And you just got back from tour, right? And you're already writing again?
Yeah. So I think I came home on Monday. So gave myself a day off, and now it's back to editing, which is full force and exciting, but also a little nerve-wracking.
Do you teach still, or are you writing full-time?
So currently I'm just writing. I was finding that as a teacher, like I would, be working at least like 8-9 hours a day, and then I'd be coming home to mark and all that kind of stuff and prepare for the next project they're working on or whatever it was. And I found that was not a sustainable way for me to be an author as well. At the same time, I think that I'm the kind of person where I'm going to do one thing at a time, and I'm going to go full force on whatever it is that I'm working on. So I knew that I needed time. If I wanted to work on these 2 books, like I needed to just pause on everything else in my life and just dedicate my time undividedly to that. So right now I am just writing, and teaching is definitely like a future possibility for me. But we'll just kind of see what happens with these books. And I'm not closing myself off to any possibility in that sense.
How do you find that you balance kind of taking care of yourself and allowing yourself to be creative? Well, maybe you've already answered this in the one about kind of engaging with people, but when you're working in social media and you're writing about big topics and maybe people are sharing opinions or whatever, how do you separate yourself from that noise and give yourself that space to create? Yeah.
So I think this is something that I've become a lot better at more recently. As a poet, I feel a lot of things. That's just like a part and parcel of like, being, an artist in a field that requires so much emotion. So it can definitely burn you out. And I think that it's so important to be cognizant of that and aware when you are getting to that point of burnout. I share poetry that is deeply, honest and raw and emotional at times. And I understand the impulse of people that want to reach out to me with their stories. And I think that's beautiful that I've created a space where they feel they can reach out. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that I'm not always capable of being there for people in the way that they would hope that I can be. I'm not a counselor, and I'm not trained on how to disconnect myself emotionally from the emotions of others. So I need to kind of take care of myself in that sense so that I'm not becoming a conductor for other people's feelings, which is, a nod to one of my poems in the book. So I'm just big on boundaries. I'm big on just saying, hey, like I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm just not in the right space right now to be there for you, but I can provide you with these resources. And just like sticking to that, I think is important, because oftentimes we feel like we owe ourselves to the world all the time, and that's not a sustainable way to live. And I don't think that it's necessarily like a normal thing for us to constantly be interacting with strangers on the internet and not taking care of ourselves or, being there for the ones who are physically and emotionally closest to us. So boundaries are huge, and expressing those boundaries does not make you a jerk. It just means that you are caring for your well-being. And I own that, and I'm not shy to say it.
I think that's something a lot of people maybe don't think about, that you might get strangers sharing their trauma with you and asking you to take that on. And that's a lot of emotional work for you as well. And maybe something that people don't realize happens.
Absolutely. So. And I think that, there were many years of my life where I felt almost like I needed to be there for everyone. But it just was not helping me grow, and it wasn't helping me feel well emotionally. And I had to kind of reckon with that and be like, I need to make a change in order to be able to sustain this work, because I can't keep sharing on the internet if I'm going to be engaging with people in this very intense way all the time.
Awesome. And we'd like to ask everybody, what are you enjoying right now? Reading or listening to or watching anything?
So I am currently reading Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. And this is a book that I think that I just needed. I needed something that allows me to breathe. And what I loved about Gabby's writing, what I love about it currently, is how visceral and beautifully crafted the scenery and the imagery and the characterization is. I absolutely love this book, and I can't wait to finish it and then just rave about it.
So Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, we will look that up. I haven't heard of it.
Me either.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. We really appreciate it, especially when you're just coming off your book tour.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life podcast. If you're interested in Jasmin's books, we'll include links in our show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at KoboWritingLife.com. Be sure to follow us on socials. We are Kobo Writing Life at Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter. This episode was hosted by Joni DePlacido and Stephanie McGrath, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham, and our theme music, as always, is composed by Tearjerker. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!